Oh, snap! Snap!
The world is finally waking up to the crap that's baked into and sprayed on kibble dog food. No longer can commercial pet food manufacturers fool us with pretty pictures and false promises. This is the raw dog food truth. The view and opinions expressed on this podcast are not intended to replace medical advice. Before starting any raw diet, do research, ask lots of questions, and consult your vet.
Well, hello, raw feeders. I'm DeDe Mercer-Moffat, the CEO of Raw Dog Food and Company, where your pet's health is our business. We're friends. Don't let friends feed kibble. Well, today is a very special episode. As you guys have heard, Nealy and I talk about Dr. Tom Cowan. He is joining us today, so we're very excited. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Cowan. He's been one of the leading voices speaking out against the mainstream medical narrative, which is why we love him so much. But he's a well-known alternative medicine doctor, author, and speaker with a common sense, holistic approach to health and wellness. He's given countless lectures and workshops throughout the U.S. on a variety of subjects in health and medicine. He's the author of 6 best-selling books, which Nealy has all of them. But some of his books are The Contagion Myth, vaccines, autoimmunity, and the changing nature of childhood illness. And this one that I have and I refer to many times, Cancer and the New Biology of Water. For 34 years, Dr. Cowan had a general medical practice, first in upstate New York, then in New Hampshire, and also in San Francisco. He is also the vice president of the Weston A. Price Foundation. And you guys have heard me talk about that. You need to find the Weston A. Price Foundation and start following them. But Dr. Cowan, you have retired after 34 years, and now you're helping people live better, healthier lives through Dr. Cowan's Garden and the new biology clinic that we're going to talk about. But first, I want to ask you about the chairman of the board, Pumpkin. How is Pumpkin doing?
Pumpkin is doing well. He's the only one of our animals. We have 6 chickens, 4 cats, and we're about to get 3 goats on Sunday. 2 baby dwarf goats and an adult, but not their mother. And Pumpkin is the only one who comes inside. He doesn't like mingling with the rabble anymore. So he comes inside and comes and goes as he pleases, but mostly in the day he sleeps on the bed and then he goes out most of the evening and night.
Now, what,
he loves that whole rabbit stuff.
We send Dr. Cowan some whole ground rabbit. We've sent you a lot of different blends. Yeah. And as we have said, trying to figure out cats is difficult, right? They're very different than dogs. And they're so cool. So we had a cat that lived 21 years. And so Pumpkin's going to probably live a very long life.
Yeah. Pumpkin, he eats mostly ground beef and venison. And he eats a lot of organ meats. He likes like ground heart and liver from this grass-fed biodynamic farmer neighbor. And then he eats your stuff.
Polyface. Polyface is the farm you're talking about. Is that correct?
No, but we do get stuff from Polyface too, like chicken hearts and chicken livers and occasionally he'll eat a chicken like foot. He likes to chew on the bone. He eats the bone till nothing. And
so see, people, cats can eat bones just fine without having any problems.
Yeah, they're sort of raw, but I occasionally will heat up the food just so it's not like freezer cold, not cooked, but just like literally seconds just to warm it.
Yeah, it is very cold still coming out of the refrigerator. Yeah. But so I understand that you really were never into like dogs and cats, but then never. you got these cats. Why did you get cats in the first place?
So we moved to upstate New York, and we, the plan was to make a huge garden. I'm a big gardening fan, and raise animals. I mean, I mean, sure, partly for self-sufficiency reasons, but frankly, there's a lot of farmers around here, and it's not like we're gonna not have food if we don't raise our own animals. But we just thought that we had the land, and so we built a barn and we built 2 fences, and we have about an acre fenced in garden and a big greenhouse, and then we have a barn with a loft which has all these sort of the apartment complex for the cats. And then we got chickens. Somebody gave us chickens, so we have a little chicken house, and they give us eggs. And then we thought we needed cats for mice. And I thought when I got these cats that I would never see them. They would be out in the barn and they would eat the mice. And maybe I would feed them, or I don't know. I just had no interest. I thought cats were kind of weird, or just I don't know what I thought. But quickly Pumpkin decided to come and hang out with me, not my wife. Like, he would walk right past her and come up to me and want to be held. And next thing you know, Pumpkin and I were like best friends. He followed me to the garden and sit on my lap. And I would say, Pumpkin, you got to eat mice, and he'd catch a few mice, but mostly not, because we overfeed them probably. But his sister Fluffy, she's a great mouser. She catches mice all the time. And then they had children, which was weird. But I tell you, the interesting thing is, they had 12 children. We've given away 10 of them. And so we still have Lucy and PJ. PJ is Pumpkin Jr., who looks just like Pumpkin. And those 10 or so, everybody we've given them to said they were the best cats they ever had. And these were people who often had cats. And I don't know what it is. I just know that
I do.
They've had no trauma, really, except the only time they went anywhere was to drive in the car over to our place, which they had to do that. And then they're here, and we're very consistent. Like, we go out at 7 o'clock every morning with our bowl of, ground liver and your stuff, and occasionally raw milk, which we heat up to room temperature, which we put an egg yolk in it. And occasionally we give them like freeze-dried liver, or salmon, wild salmon. That's it. And they have a nice place. They have, hay bales in a loft. So there's all kinds of cubbies and stuff. And then we have a sauna space incandescent red light, which is, so when it's really cold, they actually like to hang out in front of that. And they can go anywhere. They hop the fence and go in the woods and go wherever they want to go. And Pumpkin now comes in and out. And so so we go out at 7, we go out at 6 in the evening, feed them, hang out with them. There's the chickens there. Pumpkin's afraid of the chickens, but Fluffy will swat them just for fun sometimes. Like, they don't even do anything. She'll just walk up to them and go whap. And I don't know. I mean, they just seem friendly, and I don't know. And so Pumpkin, he's so communicative, and he's my little guy. So that's all I can say.
That's awesome. One of the things I say a lot is people get so wrapped up in their dog and are like, oh, they're my fur babies, they're my children. And I understand what they mean, but they don't respect the dog being a dog. And so they treat him like a little kid. And I would be willing to bet that part of the reason that the people that were lucky enough to get one of your kittens is that you have allowed the cat to be the cat and respected them for who they are, and also started them out on a proper diet, which, most people go running to the vet and like, what do I do? What do I feed them? And of course, they get multiple vaccines and
Yeah.
worming and kibble and all that stuff. So, so that's a fantastic start for
Yeah. I mean,
for
we interact with them, but I mean, I don't know anything about animals really. I never, but my approach was always to let Pumpkin decide and let all of them decide. If they want me to pick them up, I'll pick them up. If they don't want me to touch them, I'm not going to touch them. If they want to go off and not come home for a day, Pumpkin did that a lot. That's just his choice. I don't know if it's a choice, but he decided, and he wants to climb a tree, he climbs a tree. If he wants to come in, he comes in. And the reason we did that was because once they had the babies, Pumpkin didn't want anything to do with the barn. He just didn't want to have, and then he was in the greenhouse under a light. And I just thought when it was like below 0 that it was too cold for him. So he would come and sit at the door, so we let him in. And next thing you know, he liked that. But even still, I think you're right. I mean, he just does, he does what he wants, and we interact with him based on what he says to interact, And now, I mean, I can rub his belly and massage his belly, and he, in the beginning you couldn't touch him there. He was not into that. So I just do what he seems to want me to do. That's how I approach it.
I love it. So, Dr. Cowan, sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you've taken your understanding of the body, the human body, which I want to talk about your new biology clinic here in a second and why you came up with that, and applied that to the cats. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't sound like you have taken them to get their vaccines and their flea and tick and their heartworm. And this is something that a lot of our pet parents really, really have an issue with. They're very afraid to push back on their vets. One of the reasons that we do the podcast is to try to help people understand maybe what's not so good about those things and to give them some courage to push back. But as you know, the medical industry is, it's like that big old tidal wave, and you're trying to maneuver. But is that what you did? You just applied what you know about the humans to the cats as well?
Yeah. And I'm sure you can, this, but once you start getting somebody like me talking about their cat, like it's all, like that's the end of. But I do have 2 stories about this that I think answer your question. And these are, I can say that I've learned more from Pumpkin about how to be a better person than just about anybody I know. And including probably a better doctor, even though I'm not a doctor really anymore. But so let me tell you the first story. So they eat on a box, right? So they get on the box, and we bring out the food, my wife and I, we put it in their bowl, and then they eat it. And then Pumpkin would often let us know that he wanted more food. And sometimes we had some, but in the way he did it was so interesting. He rarely like meows or says anything, right? Just doesn't. Occasionally will, but he would sit there near his bowl, look at us, and meow. Like, I want more food. It was clear. And I would then respond and say, well, Pumpkin, we don't have any more food. We didn't bring any more food out. And, here I am, like this sort of grown man. And here's what I noticed about that. He never interrupted me. He would look at me, and I would say my piece, like, I don't have any more food and you've had enough for whatever reason. And he would wait for the whole thing, and then he would go, meow. Like, I hear you, but I'm still hungry, so give me more food. And then I would say whatever I was going to say, and he never once interrupted me. He would sit there and watch me, wait till I finished, and then he'd go meow, because he didn't agree. He just thought I was wrong, and he wanted more food. And you think about that when you're talking to people, right? There's this sort of interrupting and arguing, and nobody listens to. He clearly listened to me, but he didn't agree. And I thought that's such an amazing model of communication strategy. And he always did that. And then I mostly fed him, so it seemed to work. And the other one, which is more to your point, so I told Pumpkin, my mother used to tell me, she said, "Oh, you should go to the doctor every once in a while." And I said, or regularly. I said, I do. I went in 1984 when I started residency. They had a physical exam, so I went. And then I have an appointment in 2034. And with an old guy, in case he dies, then I don't have to go to the appointment. So that's regular, like 50 years, I go to the doctor. If he dies, I'll skip it, and hopefully then I'll go in 2084. So I told Pumpkin when he came here, Pumpkin, you're going to the vet the day after I go to the doctor. So, and we've kept our word. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So one day, Pumpkin doesn't come back. And then he comes back the next day, and he's got a big slit in his ear. Like, I don't know if he got in a fight or a branch or something. Big old gouge out of his ear. And I looked at it and, what am I going to do? It didn't seem to bother him. He seemed totally fine. So, okay. So the next day, he doesn't come back, and I don't know what happened to him. He comes back the following day, and his entire ear was hard as a rock. His ear was completely hard as a rock. And he seemed fine. He ate and didn't seem to bother him. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But, and I didn't do anything. I didn't put peroxide, didn't do anything, because I couldn't anyways, even if I wanted to, he probably wouldn't let me. Okay. So I said, Pumpkin, just take care of yourself. So he goes off, didn't see him for 2 days, thinking he's probably dead in the woods and then he comes back the next day, and now his entire ear is basically an abscess and full of pus. And again, I didn't do anything, because what am I going to do? And he doesn't go anywhere. And he seemed fine. He ate and play, whatever played is. And then again, I didn't see him for a day. Comes back maybe 2 days later, and all you see is a little spot there. And it must have drained and taken care of himself. Now, here's the thing. I worked in an ER for 10 years and had a practice for 35 years. I never once saw anybody with a abscessed ear who we didn't drain it and put antibiotics in. I mean, even in my practice, I probably wouldn't have done that. I didn't see anybody who had that. But in the ER, so my point is, most doctors, and I would dare to say all doctors, have never seen what happens to that situation. Like I would have had no idea what happens if somebody's entire ear is just pus, because that's what it was with Pumpkin. I would have thought, well, it may spread to their brain, or I don't know what'll happen. But I couldn't do anything. I guess I could have tried to capture him or something, but I didn't. And now, it's like a year and a half later, of course, you can't even tell which ear it is. And he's had a few other things like that. I don't know what happens, but I see things in him which I never saw in my medical practice. We didn't treat anybody with draining it and giving them antibiotics or vitamin C or something, but didn't give anything.
So
Except appropriate food.
say that again, Niels.
Except appropriate food.
Yeah, I mean, he still seemed to eat, and we gave him food, and he's out in the sunshine, or sometimes, and he's on the earth, and he's playing with his friends who he thinks are beneath him now. But he seemed fine, and he didn't seem worried about it. He didn't even like scratch it, right? Like I thought he would bother him, but he didn't. And so I didn't do anything about it. And he seemed fine. And yeah, there's so I don't know if there's a lot of other things that I've seen with them now. You see with, I think you see with animals who are, quote, well cared for, they just heal. I mean, they get injuries, right? He got in a fight, I think.
That is one thing that we don't seem to have, Dr. Cowan, is a control group with people or with pets,
Yeah.
right? Now we do with my animals, Nealy's animals, Dr. Jasik's, our entire team. We don't put toxins in their body, right? As you would say, we've stopped poisoning our pets in the traditional veterinary manner.
Yeah.
And what we do see is a lot of pets coming through here that are very ill, right? And cancer certainly on the rise. And after the last 3 years that we've all endured and lived through, I think one thing that has come about is the people that are awake and that want to learn are seeing that possibly these toxins that we're putting in the body that are supposedly to make us healthy are causing us to be very, very sick.
Yeah, it's incredibly common to see. Almost every dog we see has some form of vaccine damage or neurological damage from a flea and tick medication, or all these things that they call quote unquote preventative, which don't prevent anything. But the veterinary industry is very similar to the medical industry, but I think it's even worse because it takes even longer for things to trickle down from the human perspective to the animal perspective. And then veterinarians end up with, there'll be drugs that the human industry has thrown out. So they just send them down to the veterinary industry. And who's going to know if they don't really work? It's not. Yeah. So it's, and people are so married to that, oh my gosh, I have to do something, I have to fix it. And I'm like, no, leave it alone. Leave it alone.
Yeah. I mean, Pumpkin does get ticks. We have a lot of ticks here. And I'd say in the summer, spring, I pull off 2 to 5 ticks a day off him. And he seems to A, let me do it, and B, they don't seem to bother him.
Right?
I mean, I don't even know if I have to do it, but it's just weird with he's got these black things all over him. So I pull him off, and he lets me do it.
So let me ask you a question. Did it ever enter your mind to give him flea and tick medication?
Never.
And tell us why.
Well, I don't, just let me say, I know very little about what those things are, or animal medicine, right? I never really looked into it. But I assume even if they're quote natural, like pyrethrum or something, I don't even know what they are. First of all, I don't see any need for it. And second of all, I'm sure they're toxic stuff. I have a story, which unfortunately I can't find the reference anymore, but it goes to even things like fleas, ticks, and lice. I mean, Pumpkin gets ticks, like I said, but they don't seem to bother. But there was a story about lice. So they had this study where they put 12 different people, men and women of different professions, and they had them sit around a round table, and they put a louse in the middle of the table, and then they just let the louse go to whoever they wanted to. So there was a plumber, an electrician, and a hairdresser, and a couple of doctors and lawyers and all that. And no matter where they sat, the louse always went and jumped on the head of the psychiatrist. And that convinced me that the louse was eating toxic thoughts that were probably emanating out of the head of the psychiatrist, because that's, I think, the only kind of thoughts in most psychiatrists' head. So I think even ticks and lice, I mean, ticks and fleas, and they're there because there's something wrong. They're eating something toxic coming out of the animal. I can't prove that, but that's what I think. And so if I saw that, I would change their straw or change their food or change their water, or, put an EMF remediation device in their barn or something. We don't spray anything on our fields, and they're in the garden all the time. Because there's mice living underneath the straw, so they love to play in the garden. So maybe they don't like if we put cow manure. I don't know what it is, but
we've often said with your work, and we want people to go over and listen to your talks on germ theory versus terrain theory. And Nealy and I have talked about that a lot. But the question is, if that's really true and there aren't any viruses, what's going to happen to the rabies vaccine? What's going to happen to the canine influenza vaccine? All of these vaccines would have to go away if, in fact, there aren't any real viruses. So probably not going to happen in the veterinary world. Wouldn't you say, Dr. Cowan?
I don't know what's going to happen. What I do know is that there is no evidence that there is such a thing called a virus. Zero. I don't know that I need to walk through the whole thing here, but there's no evidence of contagion from any study ever between animals or people. There's no study showing that filtered secretions, in other words, if you take the mucus of somebody or the blood of an animal or a person or the snot or the bronchial fluid and filter it so you have just the liquid part which would contain the virus, and expose that to another animal or person in a normal way, which means not injected in their brain or put it into their lungs through a intubation tube, which is ridiculous. There's no study that shows that caused illness. So that's the first thing. Then there's no study showing any particle that you could call a virus in any biological fluid of any animal or person, including rabies. Rabies I happen to have looked into. There's not one paper describing a particle that could be called a virus that meets the definition of a virus in any fluid of any animal with rabies. And by the way, Mike Wallach actually got from the CDC, and I don't remember the exact numbers. The last, I think it was like 62 cases of rabies in the US, something like 54 had no contact with any animal in the previous 6 months. So it has nothing to do with animals. Anybody who says that they got sick from being bitten by a rabid animal, that proves it's a virus, they must be saying that the only thing in a bite from an animal who's not doing well is a virus, right? There's no enzymes, there's no proteins, there's no fear related to that event. There's no anything else but simply a virus. And interestingly, you can prove there's enzymes and proteins and fear associated with that event, right? Because you can see them. The only thing you can't prove that's in that saliva is a virus, because you cannot find it. And the way they isolate a virus is the epitome of absurdity, because they take unpurified stuff, mix it on a cell culture, poison and starve the cell culture, and by some quirk of language, they call that isolation of a virus. I mean, that's the most absurd inversion of language. Orwell would be proud. So there is no evidence that any of those illnesses, and I frankly, like I said, I don't know much about canine, whatever it's called, but there is no chance it's a virus. Zero. There's no chance it's contagious in the sense of the secretions of one animal causing another animal to be sick. There is every likelihood that they're being starved or poisoned in a similar way. You know, even something like chickenpox, the height of the chickenpox situation in the US had to do with a lot of, maybe a bunch of things, but one of them was people were using wallpaper that was impregnated with arsenic-based paint. And the arsenic paint was, you know, what do you call it, leaching out or evaporating into the air and causing rashes in sick children. So there's a common exposure, which is why people think people who get sick in the same place are transmitting an illness. But you have to remember, I mean, for hundreds of years, they thought scurvy was a transmissible illness. And the reason this matters is they had sailors, one after another got sick, their teeth fell out, they went into failure, whole thing. So what did they do? They quarantined them. And you know what happened? They died. And you know what would have helped them? Eating a lemon. Like that would have solved the problem, which is why anybody who says, oh, this is irrelevant, this doesn't matter what the cause of illness is, you know, this is whatever, it's ridiculous. Of course it matters.
I agree. I'm with you. I think it's one of the most important things for people to understand, because like you said, if we don't stop this, they're going to use that over and over and over again, and we have to draw the line somewhere. There is one thing and
you'll never figure out why those dogs got sick, because you think it's a virus. So you don't look at the food and the fact that they never get to run around and people are abusing them and they putting flea medicine. And by the way, there are many, many doctors in the early part of this century who said they never saw a case of cancer until they started vaccinating people.
100% believe that. 100%.
Cancer is a vaccine complication. And my opinion about all vaccines, including human and animal ones, is simple. There is no possibility of benefit. None. And everybody who gets a vaccine or animal is harmed. Period. That's it. There's no gray area here. Some people have more harm, right? They get really sick right away. And other people, you don't see much. But there is no chance of doing the normal vaccines, human or animals, and not being harmed. No chance. And no benefit, no possible benefit, ever.
I say that every single time I'm on the podcast. I say those exact words every time. So
yeah, that's as clear and simple as you can make it.
Mm-hmm. And you know what is so crazy, Dr. Cowan, is that you can't take a cat or a dog in for a spay, neuter, or a dental without the clinic saying you must get your vaccines updated. You must vaccinate your pet. So a lot of pet parents will go ahead and just do it. Or if they're trying to take them to a groomer, a trainer, you know, a boarding facility. And to me, it's just like, you just cannot put your animal in that situation, right? No. Don't put them in that situation, because you are going to have issues down the road. But I just don't think that, well, I think that the narrative is so strong that vaccines, poisons, as we try to say, on the podcast that poisons are going to make your dog healthier. And they just buy into it.
Well, and I don't know what people like that should do except not go to those things, but it can be tricky. And then I would say just make it up.
We say that all the time.
Yeah,
That's
just,
what I say too.
I mean, and you say, well, that's not very moral or whatever. But I mean, if you're in a situation of, the only thing I care about in that situation, frankly, is that cat or dog or whatever.
Mhm.
I don't care about the connection with the vet. I don't care. I don't care. If they're going to do that, I don't care about their license. I don't care about their livelihood. I care about Pumpkin. And you're not going to do that. And whatever I need to do to have that happen, I'm going to do it.
Bravo.
Love it. Love it. Love it.
We say that all the time. We say, learn to
do.
lie. So I haven't fed Kibble. I haven't fed Kibble in 23 years. And neither has Nealy. And my German Shepherd, she ripped her leg open, so it had to be sewn up. So I took her to the emergency, and they said, "What do you feed?" And I said, "Kibble." And they said, "Is she totally vaccinated?" I said, "Absolutely," which is totally a lie, right? Because and they were like, "Great." Because I know the game, right? And if you go in,
you can always say the dog ate your vaccine card.
Yeah,
we used to do that in elementary school. You know, the dog ate my homework.
Yeah.
So just say your dog ate the vaccine card.
Exactly.
We put kibble on it, and the dog just ate it right up. You know, what do you want?
You'd probably be better if you said, I feed a prescription diet. They'd be like, right on, you know?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But we do that. And we try to tell our pet parents, don't tell your vets that you're feeding a raw diet, because once you do that, that's the whole cause. That's the whole cause of your dog or cat's illness, right? Mm-hmm. There's salmonella, there's E. coli, there's this, there's that. And so one of the things that we always talk about is bacteria. And again, back to Dr. Cowan, you need to listen to Dr. Cowan and understand about bacteria. So let me ask you this question. You let Pumpkin go out, eat, and you encourage him and you tell him, hey, go get you some mice.
Yeah, he doesn't listen to me, but
no.
In fact, there's a mouse eating the greenhouse plants, and I tell him, Pumpkin, this is your job. And he just looks at me like, anyways.
So there'll be no coming inside for you till you get that mouse.
Yeah. I've been promoted. It's somebody else's job to do that now.
Yeah, that's what he said. Tell PJ to do it.
Yeah.
All right. So here's the question. You're not worried about bacteria. Why not?
Tell Pumpkin, you got to cook that mouse.
Exactly.
Bad Pumpkin.
You know, and here's what they say, Dr. Cowan. We hear this argument all the time. Dogs and cats have been domesticated and they have evolved to eat all this processed sphincter food, as I call it, on the market, right? They've evolved to eat it. I'm like, well, that's a bunch of crap.
That is just total bullshit.
That's what we say.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. There is absolutely zero evidence for any such nonsense.
Tell people about so everybody thinks that you get a quote unquote bacterial infection and that bacteria cause illness and all that. So explain, I say it a lot too, but maybe coming from you, people might listen a little bit harder. Explain what bacteria actually do, because people are terrified of it.
So people need to answer the following question. If you are attempting to be logical about, what causes something, right? So you'd use an example. Does, and this so-called scientific method is dependent on finding a dependent variable and an independent variable. And what that means, to put it in plain English, is the dependent variable is the effect, and the independent variable is the thing you vary to see what causes the effect. So just a simple example. You have a nail in a wall. The effect is the nail goes into the wall. The independent variable is if I hit the nail with a hammer, does that cause the nail to go into the wall? That's what we're looking for. Why does the nail go into the wall? That's a dependent variable. My hypothesis is hitting it with this object called a hammer will make that happen, right? So you hit the wall, the thing with the hammer, the nail. If it goes in, it does. And if it doesn't go in, it doesn't. And then you might say, well, I need a control here. How do you know it wasn't the movement of my arm going like this that pushed the nail in, right? That's ridiculous. But so you could do it without a hammer, right? Take the nail and go like this. Doesn't go in. Then you do it with a hammer and it goes in. Now, you wouldn't do that by taking the whole toolbox and hitting the nail with the toolbox, which may or may not contain a hammer. If you did that, you would have to say it's the toolbox that made the nail go in or not a hammer, because you don't even know if there's a hammer in there, right? So that's called thinking.
Oops, we got a problem.
Right.
There's no
Now,
thinking anymore.
If you apply that to bacteria, you say the dependent variable is the animal gets sick, like diarrhea, right? That's the effect. So the hypothesis is this Salmonella bacteria causes the diarrhea. That's the hammer. So obviously you can't have Salmonella in a pile of dog poop and feed the animal dog poop and then see if they get sick and then blame it on the Salmonella, because it might be something else in the dog poop, right? That's like hitting it with the toolbox. So you'd have to isolate the Salmonella, and so you would only give an animal Salmonella and see if they got sick, right? That's the hammer. Now, with viruses, you can't even do the experiment because you can't find and purify a virus. So you can't even find the hammer. In fact, you don't even know that there is a hammer. So they had to make up the fact that there's a hammer and give it all sorts of properties, like it's an intracellular parasite. Well, how do you know if you have, and it's got a genome? How do you know if you've never seen it? It's like the argument I sometimes use. I know why all those buildings in the Ukraine are demolished. It's because there's invisible exploding unicorns. So how do you know that? Have you ever seen an invisible exploding unicorn? No, because they're invisible. You can't see them. So how do you know that they're causing the buildings to get blown up? Because the buildings are blown up. How can you say that it's not from well, can you see them? No, they're invisible. Well, then how do you know it's the unicorn? Because the buildings are blown up. So that's the way it goes. With viruses, it's, yeah, but they got sick. Yeah, but you didn't see the virus. Well, but they argue whether the person got sick or not, or the dog. So that's ridiculous. With bacteria, you can actually see the Salmonella. So now it's a little different. You have a hammer, and then you can purify it and give it to an animal. And as far as we can tell, there's not one study that shows the animal gets sick. In the history of published science, not one. So it's not the Salmonella. It's something else in the water or in the air or in the food or in the environment or something, or in the emotional, whatever. It's not the Salmonella. We've proven that. So then you say, well, what are those bacteria doing there? Mostly they're just living just because they eat stuff that's in that food or whatever that's there. And then you see more of them because bacteria live on dead and dying tissue. So for instance, if you take an animal and you poison it with arsenic, they get dead tissue. And then the bacteria come to bioremediate the area. And then it's like saying firemen cause fires. You see more of them, and there is a case that sometimes the bacteria, because they're living things, they make their own toxins, so that might cause a problem or cause congestion in the area. But that's rare. It's mostly they're just actually helping out by eating dead and dying tissue. And the reason you see the more pathogenic so-called ones is because there's worse toxicity. So if everything's fine, you'll just see normal. So, and then when you poison the animal, they get a lot of, toxic debris. And then you get the sort of more aggressive kind of organism, bacteria, feeding off the dead tissue. And that explains everything you see. Everything. It even explains why antibiotics seem to work, because part of this bioremediation process causes inflammation and redness, etc. And so if you kill the bacteria, you stop the healing process. Mm-hmm. And then it will happen again, or you'll form a tumor or something, which is what antibiotics are known to do. And that makes perfect sense too, because it's like you go to a log and you got fungus growth. So you say the log has a fungal infection. It's ridiculous. The log is breaking down, and the fungus are biodegrading the dead parts of the log. You don't treat that by killing the fungus. I mean, doctors do, but
and vets.
Yeah.
And you know how so the FDA has a zero tolerance policy in the raw dog food industry for bacteria. So what they do,
and for the human, there's a tolerance for the human line, but for the dog food line, there's zero tolerance. It's completely ridiculous. It's like they're trying to kill all the dogs.
So they go in.
It's their job.
Yeah. Right.
Agreed.
They go in, they do a swab. It is a pass or fail. Okay. It's a pass or fail. It doesn't say what strain or what the benchmark, or even they don't even understand, what the salmonella is doing there. And then they will make you do a recall. So what they're trying to do right now, Dr. Cowan, is they're really trying to push everybody to go into this high pressure pasteurization type food, which is, killing off all bacteria, which we say we're going to have some pretty sick dogs, I think, if that goes.
I mean, that's like, half of my diet is fermented food, which is, either raw milk or sauerkraut or, cultured bacteria living in the food. I mean, if you're afraid of bacteria, you got to hang it up, because you can't live in this world.
Yep.
You are profoundly delusional.
Thank God somebody else said it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, beyond ridiculous. I mean, it's in a sense, the virus thing, there's a transition. It's just like with bacteria. According to Pasteur and Koch, the only bacteria in us were pathogens, were disease causing. We were otherwise sterile. And that lasted until we were in the 60s or 70s, which is, of course, total nonsense. And so then there was a transition to some are normal and some are pathogens. And that's where we're at now. The reality is they're all just part of you. You're part of your microbiome, so to speak. With viruses, they also thought all these particles they see, they're all pathogens. And now some people are saying there's a virome, which means we are inhabited by trillions and quadrillions of different viruses. but that's total nonsense. All these viruses are these little particles are breakdown of your own tissue. There is no exogenous particle that infects you. Not a virus. Bacteria, they come and go. There's an interaction with the world and the food and the air, and because bacteria actually exist, like fungus actually exists. And so we have fungus and we have parasites. Parasites eat heavy metals and clean up our tissues. So treating, I don't know what they give to dogs, with treating parasites, but that's, again, if you try to prove by using thinking, isolate the thing, show that it causes disease, this effect, that's called thinking, the scientific method. I have never run across one study of a microbe shown to do that in a controlled, proper experiment. Not one. And we have 20 people looking for the last 3 years. We can't find it.
So this is what I want people to understand. You're not just talking out of your backside. You have done these tests. As I say sphincter. I have to say sphincter a couple of times every
Well,
podcast.
I haven't done the experiments myself.
Right.
I read the studies.
Which is, you're very educated on it, so it's not like you're just hypothesizing.
They're hypothesizing. They have a hypothesis that this single bacteria causes this effect called disease. That's their hypothesis. It's not even a theory. Now, the thing is, there's some things which you can observe yourself, right? Like you can see a hammer hitting the nail in, and so you can see that cause and effect. With a virus, for instance, as it's meant to be, or a bacteria, you or I don't see that. So you have to do an experiment. You have to do it properly. You have to isolate, have a pure bacteria, because if you have it in a toolbox, then you don't know whether it's the toolbox. So you have to have the bacteria and show that it causes effect, and the conditions between exposure of the bacteria versus the part of the experiment where you don't expose to bacteria, they all have to be the same, right? If you're going to squirt bacteria up an animal's nose and show that it gets pneumonia, you have to squirt saline up their nose and show that it doesn't. Otherwise, you don't know whether it's the saline or the act of squirting something up an animal's nose, maybe the fear. You don't know. And if you do it like that, which is the only thing you could call proper logic, rational thinking in science, there is zero evidence that these things called microbes cause disease. Zero. And it's not a hypothesis I'm talking about. They're the ones with the hypothesis. And the hypothesis has been disproven, so it's not a theory. There is no germ theory. There's a germ hypothesis which has been disproven. There's no theory.
All right, so let me ask you this. There's 20 of you guys that are doing this work. Why is the rest of the world doing something else that is harmful to people and pets?
I mean, people tell me, and people I respect, and I agree with this, don't question people's motivation. Don't even comment on it. So I don't know why Joe Blow, doctor or vet, doesn't understand this. I only know that I didn't understand this either, even 3-4 years ago. Not like I do now. I had some inkling. And why is that? So here's a embarrassing admission. So you showed that, or had the book Vaccines and Autoimmune Disease. This is like 5 years ago. I wrote in there about the measles virus causing measles. And I was wrong. Why did I do that? If somebody had asked me the day that book came out, Tom, how do you know, or how does a virologist know there's such a thing as a measles virus? You know what the answer would have been? Well, a whole lot of words to try to convince you that I could bamboozle you into forgetting about that question. But the reality is I didn't know the answer to that. Not only didn't I know if there was a measles virus, I didn't know how you would go about knowing whether there is. And this is somebody who's been a doctor for 35 years, went to medical school, did training, has written that HIV had nothing to do with AIDS. I was deep in this movement. 5 years ago, I wrote a book, and I could not tell you how a doctor knows whether there's a measles virus or not. So was I a paid disinformation person? If I was, the pay wasn't very good, so I didn't keep going. I was ignorant. I mean, what can I say? I mean, I'm not proud of it, but it's like, what can you do? I never bothered to read the studies. Nobody told me where to get the studies. Nobody said, this is how it's done. Nobody said anything. I just accepted it. And I now think that every mistake that I've made in my career, probably in personal life somewhat, but I'm talking about my career, was because, very simple, I believed what I was told or heard, and I didn't know how to check. I didn't bother to check it myself. Every once in a while, I made lazy mistakes too, but that's why every single mistake. So everybody out there, if what I would suggest is go to your doctor, go to your vet, say, how do you know there's a rabies virus? I mean, it's a simple question. How can you be giving somebody a medicine to prevent this virus from hurting you or spreading or whatever, and you don't even know how you know whether it's there or not? Like, that's ridiculous. I guarantee they won't know. And they'll give you, well, they did a PCR test.
Okay.
So that's ridiculous. Because a PCR is looking for a piece of something. You had to have something first in order to find a piece of it. And I didn't ask you what the piece is. I asked you how you found the thing first. Now, they won't know. Now, think about that for a minute. Their entire career is giving people medicines against something which they don't even, not only don't they know whether it exists, they don't even know how to know whether. So you can, anybody who doesn't know how to know, you can tell them anything you want and they'll believe you, because they don't know how to even know whether you're right or not. Now, they may get pissed at you, and, well, the preponderance of the doctors think there's a rabies virus. That's what they say.
It exists by consensus.
Yeah. And so if they say that, ask them, what percentage of vets have to think it's true before it's true? 98. Okay, if I know one, then it's not true, because I know one. He says it's not true. So that's 1 out of 50. That's 90 or 7%. So it turns out not to be true by that way of thinking.
It's insane, which is why I would assume that you have developed this new biology clinic. All right. So on your website, you say, question everything, right? Question everything, especially in the medical field. So tell us about this new biology clinic, which I think is fabulous. Our listeners can go over to your site. They can become a member. And so first of all, Dr. Cowan, tell us about why you developed it, what people would get from becoming members of the new biology clinic. And in a nutshell, I would just think that they would actually be talking to somebody who knows how to think and
Yeah,
who has actually done the work.
It's very simple. I've been working with it. There's more than 20 peep doctors, by the way, or there's who know this or know most of it. And so I've been working with some, and we decided that it was time to give people access to talking to them, first online, so that, if anybody has questions about their health, they could talk to somebody who actually knows how to think about medicine. And, then they work with them with movement and with food and, just the same thing. It's similar. Somebody comes in with a sick dog, you tell the dog how to eat and let the dog run around and don't emotionally abuse the dog, and put it in a cage or stick pins in it or something. And most of the dogs are fine, I assume. And same with people. So we're just trying to help people get out of that normal system and think about it properly and empower them with movement and food and, simple things. It's really a way of thinking, because frankly, the alternative medicine is just as bad as the regular medicine. They think in exactly the same way. And the freedom so-called community thinks exactly the same way. Because, by the way, everybody, everything I said about viruses also applies to lab-leaked viruses. They don't exist. It's a sham. And so the so-called alternative health community they think exactly the same way. They just give you turmeric for your viral infections instead of who knows what.
I have heard you say that before, that they have bought the it came from China. It's a virus, lab leak. I have heard you say that. And so they're just giving you somebody else to blame besides Fauci, I guess.
What they're doing, in a sense, is, you see, if we realize there's no virus, and if anybody is interested in why people get sick, like Ebola is a great example, because we're talking about children and people who hemorrhage and then sometimes die. Now, you can go down a list as long as your arm of reasons why people hemorrhage: malnutrition, arsenic poisoning, mercury poisoning, vaccine damage, beta-lactam antibiotics, and on and on. None of them have anything to do with the virus. So that means that if you don't want to have people hemorrhaging to death, especially children, you're going to have to do something about those things, like lithium mining and mercury exposure and vaccines. So no, it's none of that. It's just a lab leaked virus. So if you're a pharmaceutical mining corporation, these lab leaked virus people are your best friends, because they're the ones who are giving you the cover story. So nobody asks, are you sure it isn't those antibiotics that you sell over the counter in Rwanda?
Oh my.
Or Ivory Coast? Or are you sure it isn't the mass starvation and poisoning and GMO stuff and DDT and lead arsenic that we're dumping in their rivers and deforesting them? You sure it isn't any? No. Let's just find the lab leaked virus. They are the best friends of the perpetrators of hemorrhaging children. Now, I don't know whether they're doing it knowingly. I doubt it, but I don't get into motivation. What I get into is, there is no evidence that there is any ability to create a lab leaked pathogen. None. If you go and look for that lab leak created virus in the tissues of anybody with Ebola, you won't find it. It doesn't exist. It's a sham. And it's the best cover for the real problem, which is poisoned, starved, vaccinated children. And that's what they don't want you to find. And it's like they're in cahoots.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's all over the news. And we'll go on this, it's like the question of, so are these unicorns, are they lab created invisible unicorns or natural invisible unicorns? And you'll have that argument for the next 50 years because there ain't no unicorns. And you'll never figure out whether they were natural or lab created, and they've bamboozled all the alternative so-called freedom community right down the wire.
So the very simply, it is stop poisoning yourself, stop poisoning your pet, feed your body well, stop giving processed foods, get you one of these water wands at Dr.
And emotional stuff, right?
Yeah. And I think that right now,
that's part of starvation.
the emotional part of our world right now is nutty. We see it in our client base. Nealy, you see it when you do consultations. I mean, the anxiety, the fear is so amped up. It is nuts.
And the animals totally reflect that and absorb that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but the UK, they actually had cabinet level discussions about killing all the cats in the UK because one cat was diagnosed with so-called COVID on a PCR test.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
That's along with the jackfruit and the papaya and the distilled water and a whole lot of other things, which are also diagnosed positive. So they were literally thinking of killing all of your cats because of a PCR test, which can't possibly demonstrate the existence of a virus. And they're killing people's backyard chickens and and vaccinating cows for God knows what.
I actually had a customer contact me who said, how do you test for the avian flu in the raw food so my dog doesn't get the avian flu? And I text Nealy and I said, how should I answer this?
There is no avian flu virus.
That's what I said.
There's no test. It's nonsense. You can't. The only thing you can do, in my suggestion, is you turn the question back to them. Can you send me a paper of the proper isolation of the avian flu virus from a sick chicken? Now they will show you a paper because there's 10,000 papers called the isolation of the virus. All of them are, they take chicken stuff and put it on a cell culture. The cell culture cells die and they blame it on the virus. They never once saw a virus. They never separated a virus. They have no pictures of the virus. They have no genetic material that they know came from that virus. Nothing. They have nothing. It's like Stefan said, and he said they asked him to summarize virology. And he thought for a minute and he said, they have nothing. There's nothing.
But so, that makes people so mad. It makes people so mad. So we do this and we turn it back around and we ask the question, and then they lose their minds. And so it's
yeah, but you say, why should you lose if this is so pervasive in the culture, and right, everybody knows it? It should be easy for your vet to come up with a study, right? That's their job. is I'm supposed to look at the science and translate it for you. And so as far as the avian flu, here are 10 papers that show how we found that the avian flu is killing your chickens, right? It shouldn't take them 3 months to go and search the literature. He should know that. I mean, if he's saying there's rabies caused by a virus, he should be able to give you the 3 historical papers, which I've looked at, that show that that's true. He doesn't, why should he need to do research on this? Like, that's what he's doing every single day. And yet they won't even know where to look.
So one question on the rabies that Dr. Jasek on our team wanted me to ask you, and she follows your work. She's totally on board. But she said, all right, what is it that they are saying is rabies that causes a dog to foam at the mouth, that they are saying, see, there's rabies, the hydrophobia.
Dogs
right?
that are foam at the mouth are poisoned, afraid, and starved. And foaming at the mouth is a non-specific toxic symptom. Like if you poison people with mercury, they foam at the mouth. It's a elimination channel. So they have increased salivation, and the saliva has mercury and other toxic metals in it. So these dogs have been poisoned, and that's one of their elimination channels. Now, it's interesting because, you know, what confuses people is, like with sexually transmitted diseases, they see you get something. But it's very interesting when you go back and look at syphilis in the mid to early 1800s. So they had this theory that sexual intercourse transmitted this disease called syphilis. So they would see people with rashes on their genitals, and they would say that must be a bacteria. So they give them mercury. And the mercury comes out in the vaginal secretions and in the semen. And so then if you're a prostitute and you're exposed to a lot of people who are using prostitutes and therefore have gotten sores on their genitals, they're given mercury, which makes them have sores in their genitals. And the mercury comes out in the semen, so that the female prostitute is now exposed in her vagina to mercury, right?
Right.
And then she gets a sore. Transmitted the disease. I mean, in a sense, that is a kind of transmission, right? Like if you have saliva that's full of mercury or arsenic, and you drink it, you give it to somebody else to drink, that may look like contagion. It's not contagion. It's simply another way of being exposed to a similar toxin. So then those prostitutes also had sores, and they had exposure to mercury, and then they would give it to the next person, and he would be exposed to mercury and get a sore, and then he would be given more mercury, and then the whole thing just went like that. So you can easily be fooled with thinking something, you know, the way to think of this is so the principle is similar animals or people who get the same symptoms at the same time, does that prove it's contagious? So just imagine you have 100 rats in your basement and you put rat poison down there. 10 rats die the next day. They all bleed to death, liver failure, etc. And then the next day, 10 more rats. Next day, 20 more rats. Next day, they're all dead. By that thinking, rat poison must be a contagious virus. They were poisoned similarly by the same agent, and that's what happened.
So just recently, so our daughter, who's a vet, she, 2 of her daughters, sick, diarrhea, vomiting. And so she's saying, you know, they're passing it back and forth. I say, so my husband was going there and he decided not to go. And I said, look, it's more something that's in the house. It's more they're getting poisoned in some
Yeah.
way. So would you say, all right, maybe you don't go there because then you might get poisoned as well, but it's not you're passing the flu around or you're passing a virus around.
Yeah, there's no microbial infection. I mean, there may be something in the house or in the food that's, not agreeing with them, or emotional. There's, starvation, poisoning, delusions, and injuries. That's what causes people to get sick. Interestingly, there was an interesting study of the transmission of the flu. So they took people and they took people with the flu, they sucked out their mucus and squirted it up people's nose and saw how many got sick. And about 10% of them got sick. So the first people had the flu and the second people didn't, and they had 10% got sick. Then they did it with saline, and they squirted the saline up their nose, and about 15% of the people got sick. So in other words, more people get sick when you squirt a placebo up their nose than if you squirt the secretions from somebody with the flu up their nose, which suggests, doesn't prove, but suggests, which should be studied, that actually being exposed to somebody who's sick, given that you're like the sort of nocebo effect, like it's like bone pointing, like you're going to get sick, because they told them they were going to try to make them sick, but they didn't tell them what they were going to give them. 15% will get sick just from thinking they're going to get sick. Except if you actually expose them to the flu, then it goes down to 10%. So something about being around people who are, if you think you're going to get sick, you got like a 15% chance you'll get sick. But if you expose yourself to somebody who is sick, it goes down to 10% because something in there probably helps you not get sick.
Which is sort of what happened with this whole quote unquote COVID, right? People were just like, oh, I'm going to get sick. So they sort of manufactured a sickness.
Yes. Fear and anxiety, lies, delusions. That's why in some ways, the number one risk factor for getting sick is delusional thinking. Because you've got yourself convinced that there's a world out there that doesn't exist, in which case you're going to appropriately live in a state of fear because you can't see it. You don't know who's going to do it to you. And so your appropriate response is to be wary, and that makes you sick.
People think the natural world is trying to kill them and the government's trying to save them. How backwards is that?
Exactly. That's so. If you think you're a quote risk factor.
Well, I know that we have gone over time. I mean, we could literally talk to you all day. It's just so fascinating. But I want people to go and listen to your in-depth information about germ theory versus terrain theory. I think that would really help them. Where is the best place for listeners to go see your videos, hear your podcast?
I think if they go to drtomcowan.com, then there's links to the BitChute channel, which I don't know where that is exactly, but they'll probably find it from there. And if they can't, they can contact customer service and get all the. I've done 100 webinars now.
I know. Nealy and I were like, I'm sure he doesn't want to talk about germ and terrain theory. He's probably gagging having to talk about it one more time.
And we wanted to hear about the cats anyway. I'm excited about the goats. You got to post stuff on the goats too. I love goats.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting because we've never had goats. But
well, what's the point? What's the main objective to having goats, or the main purpose to have goats? I'm sorry.
I mean, we may breed the little girl next year, maybe, but it's just to have more life in around the home.
Oh,
Goats are super fun. They're like
Yeah,
mischievous and into
yeah.
everything, but they're so much fun.
I've heard they're really naughty, which is good.
Yeah.
they'll
Yeah,
probably be
you'll
up
love
on
'em.
your barn.
Yeah.
Well,
So
thank
yeah, you know, a little bit manure maybe, but you know, it's mostly just because it's just so interesting hanging around animals now. I don't know why I never did it before, but
well,
better
pump,
late than never.
Pumpkin changed your heart and your focus and your
He
energy.
did. He did.
That's awesome. Now, I want everybody else to know too, for our pet parents, Dr. Cowan's Garden, a great place to go and get clean, whole food. I love all of the things that you have over there. I've seen Nealy's kitchen. She has a ton of your stuff there. But
A whole
there's,
shelf of vegetable powders. They're
yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
very good
Great.
stuff. So
Yeah,
Dr.
and
Cowan's
we're
Garden.
using, you know, I'm very particular about what and our cats love your stuff. I mean, it's like you say, it's a little tricky which one because they don't like anything always.
No,
That's
they
just not
don't.
going to happen.
And people want to get one thing for their cats, and I'm like, that will not work, right?
Yeah, it won't
Number
work.
one, you've got to feed them a variety of things, and they will help you know. But most people, have house cats, and I don't know. Everybody has this concept that you can, because it's big food, big pharma, that you can feed one thing to an
Yeah,
animal for their entire life, and they'll be healthy. And it just
yeah,
doesn't work that way.
I don't see it.
And nobody seems to realize that each individual animal has individual tastes, just like people do too. So,
Yeah,
some dogs like this and don't like that, and that's their prerogative to not like it. If they don't like it, give them something else.
yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. So we give them, we vary it and mix some venison and liver and hearts and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Chicken feet.
You do it right.
And they forage for themselves.
Yes. Go get that mouse, Pumpkin.
Yeah, I know.
All
He's
right.
getting paid a lot of money here. He's got to.
That's right. Thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. Get over to drtomcowan.com. Get your dogs on a species appropriate diet. Get over to rawdogfoodandco.com, where your pet's health is our business. And friends, don't let friends feed kibble. We'll see you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.